A rude cop, frustrated with his mundane day, decides to throw his hot coffee at a woman for no reason at all. He believes that his badge gives him the power to get away with anything, but what he doesn't know is that this woman is no ordinary person. When she pulls out her badge, everything changes in an instant. The officer freezes, realizing he's made a huge mistake. The career he thought was untouchable is now on the line. What happens next will leave you stunned and show how quickly karma can strike back when you least expect it. It was a typical morning in the city. Bustling streets, people rushing to work, and the ever-present hum of life carrying on around the busy coffee shop on the corner. The woman walking past had her mind set on the day ahead, her thoughts focused on an important meeting. She was dressed casually in a comfortable outfit, jeans, a sweater, and a light jacket. But the way she carried herself suggested something more. Confident, composed, and with a sense of quiet authority, she navigated through the crowd, unaware of the confrontation that awaited her. Not far from her, leaning casually against the wall near the coffee shop, was Officer Harris. He was a cop in his late 40s, used to the uniform and the power that came with it. But lately, he had grown reckless, accustomed to using his badge as a shield to belittle others. His demeanor was sharp, and his arrogance was evident as he surveyed the crowd for anyone he could assert his dominance over. He believed that no one would question him, no one would challenge his authority, until she walked into his line of sight. The woman approached the coffee shop, just a few steps away from the officer, when he decided it was time to act. In his mind, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He had a reputation for being a bit of a bully, someone who had no problem pulling rank. But today, his target would prove to be someone he underestimated. Officer Harris had always prided himself on using his position to intimidate others. He was the kind of cop who found small victories in belittling people, and today, it seemed like he had found an easy target in this unassuming woman. His gaze fell on her, and the moment she brushed past him, he made his move, thinking this would be another simple interaction to assert his power. But he didn't know that this woman was different. What he didn't realize was that beneath her quiet exterior lay a woman who wasn't easily pushed around. She was about to show him that even the smallest moments of disrespect could come with big consequences. As the woman made her way toward the coffee shop door, Officer Harris took a few steps forward, blocking her path with the kind of arrogance that came from years of unchecked power. His eyes narrowed as he studied her for a moment. He couldn't put his finger on it. But something about her struck him as unfamiliar, something he didn't like. Without hesitation, he decided to make her feel small. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" he barked, his voice cold and sharp, as if she had somehow crossed an invisible line. The woman, momentarily caught off guard, slowed her steps, but didn't respond right away. She had been through enough to know when someone was trying to provoke her, and this cop was no different. But something told her to stay calm, to not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "I'm just heading inside," she said politely, glancing at him but not stopping. Her voice was steady, a clear contrast to the officer's rising aggression. "Not so fast," he snapped, stepping in front of her, blocking her way. "I need to see some ID," he demanded, his tone dripping with authority, as though her mere presence was an offense. The woman raised an eyebrow, looking him squarely in the eye. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Why would I need to show you my ID?" Harris sneered. "I'm not asking, I'm telling. You're not going anywhere until you do." His voice had a harsh edge to it now, as if he relished in the small power he held in this situation. It wasn't about her. It was about control. The woman, though momentarily taken aback by his aggression, kept her composure. "There's no reason for this. I'm just trying to go about my day. I don't owe you anything." Harris, undeterred by her calm response, narrowed his eyes and took another step closer, backing her into the doorframe of the coffee shop. He was enjoying the moment, enjoying the discomfort he was causing. The people around them started to notice, sensing the tension in the air. Some of the passers-by lingered to watch, unsure whether to intervene. "You know, people like you think you can get away with anything," Harris said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I don't take kindly to people ignoring me, especially when they act like they're above the law." The woman's face softened slightly, but there was no fear in her eyes, just a steady resolve. She didn't need to argue with him. She didn't need to get angry. But she couldn't let this go on any longer. Just as he moved to take another step closer, Harris, without warning, raised his hand, holding the half-full coffee cup, and in one swift motion, he threw the hot liquid at her. The scalding coffee splashed across her jacket, burning through the fabric, a sudden shock to her system. The bystanders gasped, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Harris stood there, satisfied with the impact of his actions, expecting her to recoil, to shout, or, at the very least, cower in front of him. He was used to seeing people flinch when he made his move. Most would have been too afraid to respond. But as the liquid dripped off her jacket, the woman didn't flinch. She didn't yell. She didn't even seem fazed. Instead, she calmly wiped the coffee off her jacket, her gaze fixed on Harris. The moment felt charged with something much stronger than the anger the officer expected. The tension hung in the air as the crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of what would happen next. Harris, feeling the rush of his own self-assuredness begin to waver, smirked and crossed his arms. "What? No screaming? No excuses? Pathetic," he muttered under his breath. But even as he spoke, he realized that something in the woman's demeanor had shifted. It wasn't fear. There was something else, something that was starting to make him uncomfortable. The woman stood still, wiping her jacket one last time before looking at him directly. Her expression was unreadable, but the calmness in her eyes contrasted sharply with his blustering anger. The crowd seemed to lean in, sensing that the moment was about to take a turn. "I think you're mistaken," the woman finally said, her voice still calm but now tinged with quiet authority. She took a deep breath and reached into her bag, pulling out a badge. Harris glanced at it, his eyes narrowing, not quite understanding what he was looking at. And then, as the badge gleamed in the sunlight, it hit him. It wasn't just any badge. The woman wasn't just a civilian. She was someone with far more authority than a simple officer like him. His smirk faltered, and his eyes widened in shock. The moment stretched on, the weight of the badge in the woman's hand hanging in the air like a quiet thunderclap. Officer Harris froze, his body stiffening as the realization hit him. He had underestimated her in the worst possible way, and now the consequences of his actions were staring him straight in the face. The woman, still holding the badge with a steady hand, didn't flinch at his reaction. She stood tall, unwavering, as if the entire weight of the situation rested on her shoulders. Harris had been so eager to assert his dominance, to use his position to bully someone he deemed inferior, but now he was the one who had been caught in a web of his own making. "You know," she began, her voice even, but carrying the kind of authority that made even the bystanders step back in awe, "I was hoping this wouldn't escalate to something like this. But here we are." The officer swallowed, trying to gather his composure, but the damage had already been done. His face flushed as he glanced at the badge once more, the insignia shining back at him like a cruel reminder of his mistake. The crowd, once silent, was now buzzing with the realization of what had just happened. Some people had started recording on their phones, while others began whispering amongst themselves, trying to make sense of the shift in power that had just unfolded in front of them. "I didn't know who you were," Harris muttered under his breath, almost as if trying to excuse his actions. "But this isn't what you think." "Oh, I know exactly what I think," the woman interrupted, her tone cool but sharp. "You threw coffee at me. You harassed me. You assumed I was someone you could intimidate because of your badge. But you didn't take the time to even try to understand who I really am." She stepped closer, her presence now dominating the space between them. Harris stammered, trying to make excuses, but each word that left his mouth only deepened the hole he had dug for himself. I was just doing my job. You didn't—" "No," she cut him off, her gaze unflinching. "You weren't doing your job. You were abusing your power, and now you're going to answer for it." A tense silence hung over them as the crowd absorbed her words. People had seen the officer's behavior, but now they were hearing from someone who had the power to do something about it. The woman wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been mistreated by authority figures like Harris. She was showing them that it was possible to hold those in power accountable, no matter how high up they thought they were. The officer's mouth opened and closed, as if he was searching for the right words to justify himself, but nothing came out. His earlier arrogance had disappeared, replaced by a deep sense of regret. The realization that he had just humiliated himself in front of the very people he had sworn to protect, and the woman he had disrespected, was now sinking in. "I'm sorry," Harris said, his voice small and shaky. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think." He struggled, but the words failed him. He could feel the weight of the situation crushing him. He had acted on impulse, and now his career was teetering on the edge of disaster. There was no way to undo what had been done. The woman didn't respond to his apology right away. Instead, she allowed the silence to stretch, giving him a chance to process his mistake. The people around them were watching closely, some in disbelief, others shaking their heads. The moment was one of reckoning, not just for the officer, but for everyone who had ever seen someone in power misuse their authority without facing consequences. After a long pause, the woman finally spoke again, her words measured and powerful. "This isn't about an apology. This is about accountability, and you're going to be held accountable for your actions." She didn't need to raise her voice or make threats. Her calm, unwavering presence was enough to command the attention of everyone in the area. She pulled out her phone, making a quick call to her superiors, and within moments, the officer was informed that his actions were being reported to internal affairs. The response was swift. He would be suspended pending investigation. His career, built on a foundation of abusing his power, was now at risk of crumbling before his eyes. "You'll be hearing from my department," the woman said, her voice firm, "and the investigation will be thorough." Harris's face turned pale as the gravity of the situation hit him. He was no longer the confident officer who could intimidate anyone who crossed his path. He was just a man who had been caught in the act of using his position to harm others, and now he was facing the consequences. The career he thought was untouchable was now hanging by a thread. The woman turned to walk away, her movements graceful, but full of purpose. The crowd, still stunned, slowly began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves. Some were praising her for her bravery and calm, while others were still processing what had just occurred. In that brief moment, everything had changed. The officer's arrogance had been shattered, and the balance of power had shifted entirely. The woman didn't look back at him. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. The officer stood frozen, watching the woman walk away, her steps slow but purposeful. The weight of his actions, the hot coffee he had thrown, and the way he had used his power recklessly now fully dawned on him. The adrenaline from his earlier outburst had worn off, replaced by a sinking feeling in his stomach. His arrogance, which had once fueled him, now felt like a distant memory. His career, his reputation, everything was teetering on the edge. As the woman disappeared into the crowd, Officer Harris looked down at the coffee stain on his uniform, a stark reminder of the humiliation he had just endured. His heart raced as he realized what had just happened. This wasn't just another angry citizen lashing out at him. This woman wasn't someone who would back down. She was someone with power, someone who could turn the tables on him in an instant. And she had just done exactly that. The woman, now a few blocks away, had already made the call to her department. She didn't need to say much. The facts spoke for themselves. The officer's actions had been recorded, his behavior witnessed by multiple bystanders. What had started as a simple, unjustified act of aggression was now about to have serious consequences. Back at the precinct, the ripple effect had already begun. Word had spread quickly about the altercation. It didn't take long for higher-ups to get involved, and the internal review process was already underway. The officer's actions had crossed a line, and now the department was scrambling to cover up the damage. But it wasn't just the officer who was under scrutiny. His entire approach to his job was now being questioned. Meanwhile, the woman wasn't just waiting for justice to be done. She was taking action. She used her position to push for immediate measures. The officer's suspension was swift, but the consequences were far-reaching. Internal Affairs was investigating not just his behavior that day, but his record, his history of misconduct, and his overall approach to handling his authority. As the investigation unfolded, more than just the officer's career was at risk. His actions weren't isolated. He had a long history of overstepping boundaries, and the woman's call for accountability had sparked a larger discussion within the department. The public backlash over the incident, fueled by witnesses and video footage, was putting even more pressure on the police force to act. The officer, once smug and confident, now found himself at the center of a storm. The very power he had once used to intimidate others was now being used against him. His colleagues, some of whom had silently witnessed his behavior in the past, were now forced to confront the truth. The department couldn't afford to ignore the growing scandal. The woman's response had made it clear. Abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated, no matter who was behind the badge. But it wasn't just the officer who was feeling the heat. The woman's actions had sparked a larger movement within the community. As news of the confrontation spread, people began to share their own stories of mistreatment by those in authority, and the conversation quickly shifted toward reform. What had seemed like a personal vendetta was now seen as a reflection of a larger issue within law enforcement: the unchecked abuse of power and the need for real change. The woman, though proud of the results of her actions, wasn't focused on her personal victory. Her goal wasn't just to punish one officer. It was to ensure that this incident served as a turning point. She pushed for more accountability measures within the department, urging for more training on respect, de-escalation, and, most importantly, how to treat the people they were meant to serve with dignity. The officer, meanwhile, had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. His career, once promising, was now in jeopardy. He had a lot of time to reflect on his actions, as he waited for the outcome of the internal investigation. His once untouchable position had crumbled in a matter of hours, all because of his inability to understand the importance of treating others with respect. But the officer's downfall wasn't just a personal loss. It was a win for those who had faced similar mistreatment. The woman's quiet strength and refusal to back down had sent a message. No one, not even someone in a position of authority, was above being held accountable for their actions. The ripple effect from that single moment had already begun to make waves far beyond the initial confrontation. As the days passed, the department issued a statement acknowledging the officer's suspension and the ongoing investigation. The media coverage continued to amplify the conversation about police reform, and the woman's actions remained the focal point of discussions about the responsibility of law enforcement officers to treat everyone with fairness and respect. As the investigation into Officer Harris's conduct continued, the public and the police department alike were forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The woman's swift and decisive actions had not only put an end to Harris's reign of intimidation, but had ignited a broader movement toward accountability and reform within law enforcement. The ripples of that one act of defiance continued to spread, forcing everyone, both inside and outside of the police force, to reevaluate their perceptions of authority and how it should be wielded. For the officer, the fallout was swift and severe. His suspension eventually turned into a permanent removal from duty. An internal review of his past cases revealed a disturbing pattern of abusive behavior, including mistreatment of civilians, particularly those who he deemed easier targets. The evidence was damning, and there was no defending his actions. His career, built on intimidation and misconduct, had been irrevocably destroyed in the blink of an eye. He had been the embodiment of unchecked power, and his own hubris had led to his downfall. For the woman, however, the battle was never about her personal victory. Yes, she had gained the satisfaction of seeing the officer face the consequences of his actions, but her true purpose lay in the greater mission: to use the incident as a stepping stone for real change. The issue of police brutality and misconduct was not just one isolated case. It was a systemic problem that needed to be addressed at its root. Her efforts didn't stop with the public exposure of Officer Harris's behavior. She had become a driving force behind a new wave of advocacy for law enforcement reform. She spoke at town halls, met with local officials, and worked with community groups to push for better training programs, improved oversight, and more stringent accountability measures. Her advocacy focused on the importance of empathy and respect in law enforcement, arguing that officers needed to understand the people they were sworn to protect, not just control them. One of the key lessons that emerged from this incident was the realization that abuse of power, no matter how small or seemingly inconsequential, could have far-reaching consequences. The fact that the officer had felt entitled to treat the woman with such disdain, simply based on his position, highlighted a deeper issue that many had overlooked. His behavior was not just about one angry outburst. It was about a mindset that permeated through various layers of authority, often going unchecked because of fear or complacency. But as the conversation surrounding the incident evolved, so did the community's response. The conversation shifted from one officer's actions to the broader implications of authority and how it could be misused. More people began to speak out, sharing their own experiences of unfair treatment at the hands of those in power. It became clear that the problem was not just the actions of a single individual, but the culture within law enforcement that allowed such behavior to persist for so long. The woman's stance became a beacon of hope for many. By confronting the officer with calm authority and refusing to back down, she had demonstrated that standing up for yourself didn't have to be loud or aggressive. It could be firm, measured, and dignified. The woman wasn't just fighting for justice in her own case. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been unfairly treated by those meant to protect them. Her actions showed that one person's resolve could spark a much larger movement. Her advocacy began to gain momentum. The public, inspired by her bravery, rallied behind her calls for reform. Neighbors who had been silent about such issues began to speak up, organizing community events and workshops to discuss how to build a more inclusive, just society. Local leaders, previously hesitant to take action, now found themselves pushed by the collective voice of the people demanding change. Within the police department, Harris's case became a turning point for others. His suspension and eventual firing were not just personal consequences. They were part of a larger effort to show that officers who abused their power would no longer be protected or allowed to continue their roles. The department began revisiting its training programs, introducing mandatory courses on racial sensitivity, bias reduction, and emotional intelligence. The goal was clear: to create a force that didn't just serve the public, but truly understood and respected them. For the woman, the ultimate victory was not in seeing the officer lose his job. It was in the lasting impact her actions had on the department, the community, and the conversations around justice. She had been the catalyst for change. But she didn't stop there. She used her platform to continue pushing for reforms that would outlast her moment of fame. She became a symbol of the power of standing firm against injustice, and her name became synonymous with advocacy for accountability and fairness. In the months that followed, the woman's efforts led to the establishment of a civilian oversight board that gave the community a direct say in the policies and practices of local law enforcement. It was an unprecedented move, one that many had thought impossible, but the woman's actions had proven that real change could happen. The people, who had once felt powerless to challenge authority, now had a voice that could hold those in power accountable. As the story of Officer Harris faded into the background, it became clear that the ripple effect from that moment would last much longer than anyone had initially anticipated. The woman's quiet strength had opened the door for conversations that were long overdue, and the changes that followed were a testament to the power of one person's refusal to remain silent in the face of injustice. As the community rallied behind the woman's call for justice and accountability, a new sense of hope began to emerge. The once fractured relationship between law enforcement and the public started to mend, thanks to the courage of one woman who stood up in the face of injustice. Her actions had not only exposed the flaws in the system, but also sparked a broader movement toward change, one that emphasized empathy, respect, and fairness for all. The true victory, however, wasn't just in the reforms that followed or the officer's downfall. It was in the way this single event united people. It showed that when you stand firm in your beliefs and fight for what's right, no matter your position or power, you can create lasting change. The woman's strength and resolve reminded us all that justice is not a privilege, but a right that should be upheld for everyone. Now, it's your turn. Have you ever faced a situation where you stood up against injustice? What happened? Share your story in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going and continue to push for a world where fairness and accountability are the norm, not the exception. If this story inspired you, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of change, courage, and standing up to the abuse of power. Together, we can create a world where justice prevails. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more incredible stories that challenge the status quo.